Thanks everyone for tuning into this episode of the Put a Fork in It podcast. The podcast delivering fresh perspectives at the intersection of food, health, business, and creativity. I'm your host, Kaylina Cahill, photographer, storyteller, and creative entrepreneur. Today, we have a very special episode. I actually traveled down to Columbia University in New York City to interview two special guests from the nutrition department of the Teachers College and the Tisch Center for Food Education and Policy. I'm recording this intro after the fact, and I can say we definitely had a great conversation covering topics related to nutrition, teaching healthy behaviors, defining some basic terms, and much more. During my visit, I spoke with Pamela Koch, the Executive Director of the Tisch Center, and Isobel Contento, Faculty Director at the Center. Pam is a Research Associate Professor of Nutrition Education and conducts research about the connections between a just, sustainable food system and healthy eating. She uses the results from her research to create resources for school teachers and recommendations for policymakers. Pam is the primary author of the 3 books of nutrition curricula, and she frequently speaks about nutrition education and sustainable food systems across the country. She completed her BS and MS in nutrition at Rutgers and her EDD and RD from the Teachers College at Columbia University. Isobel Contento is the Mary Swartz Rose Professor of Nutrition and Education and the Director of Program in Nutrition at Columbia's Teachers College. Isobel conducts research on the design, implementation, and evaluation of interventions to improve health and reduce risk of overweight in youth. These programs employ evidence-based theories and strategies to emphasize how interactions between biology, personal behavior, and the food system all affect eating patterns and health. The results of her research aid in the training of the next generation of nutrition educators. Isobel conducts workshops with practitioners, aids in curriculum development, and speaks worldwide on how to motivate and facilitate health behavior change and provide environmental supports for change. I hope you enjoy the interview. So, thanks Isobel Contento and Pam Koch for joining me on the podcast today. We're going to get into talking a little bit about both of your backgrounds and what you do here at the program in nutrition at the Teachers College at Columbia University. So why don't we start with you, Isobel, and you can tell us a little bit about your background and what got you here.
Okay, so I'm the director of the program in nutrition, and there's a Tisch Center for Food Education and Policy housed within it, and Pam Koch is the executive director of that. So how did I get into this? Well, I came actually originally through the sciences, and I always thought that if you told people enough information, that they would all eat better. And it's only when I came here and was working with a person named Dr. Joan Gusso, who is a very leader in the field, she pointed out that probably by itself was not sufficient. And over the years, that's what research seems to have suggested, is that is not sufficient. A lot of people know a lot of things that they don't put into practice. So that led me to work with some social psychology colleagues to say, so what motivate people to make changes in their diet? And through them, I learned more about the psychosocial aspects of food choice. And that led me then into first studying about why people eat what they do, and then eventually deciding that we have to do something with that, which is to develop curricula that use that information to develop interventions that will help people eat better.
Okay. And same question to you, Pam.
Okay. So my favorite subject in high school was biology, but I was actually a kind of chunky kid, so always interested in how I could eat better as well, and knew that what my career wanted to be, even though I liked science, was to work with people. And so it ended up being a kind of natural choice to study dietetics in college. And the end of my freshman year, there was a little ad. This was way before the internet. There was a little ad in the newspaper that said, wanted, nutrition education assistant. And I said, that's what I want to do. I want to teach people about that. And I didn't even know at that point that there was a field of nutrition education. And so I started doing that and realized exactly what Isobel said, that it's hard to get people to change what they eat because you need to motivate them. And how do you do that? And so a long time later, then when I decided I wanted to get a doctoral degree, I had heard about this program and knew that this was the place for me. So I did my doctorate here, and then we wrote a grant together, which was to originally develop a curriculum that I think we might talk about later called Linking Food and the Environment. And basically 20 years later and a lot of grants and a lot of programs, I'm still here. That's the short
We're both
story.
still here
Yes.
and enjoying doing what we're doing. Yes.
Okay. And so why is this field important? I mean, it might seem kind of obvious, but why is it important to teach people to have to use nutrition and what nutrition is and all that? Why is that important?
Well, I think the short answer is that the way food is produced and the kinds of foods that are available have changed so much over the years that it's no longer intuitive what to eat, and just following what your taste buds, which might have been really helpful back in hunter-gatherer days, is no longer functional in a system that has 50,000 items in a regular grocery store, of which most maybe are in fact highly processed, taking food substances from lots of different sources so that it creates something that no humans have ever seen before. So I think the need for nutrition education has evolved in response to the change in the food system.
Mm-hmm. And just to totally agree with that, and just to add on to it is, if you think about education, sometimes you can think, oh, people need to be told what to do, and that's not what we do at all. Is we take, as Isabel just described really well, an approach that it's the system that's the problem and the foods that are available that's the problem. And also we look at it that if you say, well, people aren't eating well, why is that? You could look at it and say, well, why people make poor choices. So it's their poor choices that are making them say more and more people, as what's happening in our country, get obese. Or you could look at it and say people are disempowered, alienated, don't have the options. And then the question becomes, how do we fix the system so that's not the case? And then it's, why is it that we are creating an environment that is making so many people get obese? And what can we do about changing the system to have it that actually the way we like to say it a lot of times is the healthy choice is the easy choice for people, so that that's just what they do. I mean, ultimately, if we're really, really successful at what we do, and there's a lot working against us, so it's going to be really hard, we would actually put nutrition education out of business, because it would just be that what was available around for people would be that they would just be eating what was healthy for them, what was ecologically sustainable, what was socially just, because those were the foods that were available. And we're so far from that right now that's why we need to do the work that we do.
And so I think that leads to a more, I would call it a contemporary definition of nutrition education. So instead of nutrition education just being about dissemination of information and what foods go in what groups on what part of the plate, or even how to go to a grocery store and take a look at the nutrition facts label and pick the right foods based on that. Those are part of it, but what we really need to help people do is to become motivated. So really nutrition education today consists of really three components. One is to enhance motivation of people to eat well. The second is to facilitate their knowledge and skills to be able to do so in the food system. And the third, as Pam says, is in fact to create an environment that supports this behavior change. And motivation, you could blame the person or blame the victim in a sense and say, gee, how come people are not so motivated to eat healthy foods? Well, our biologies are such that human beings were born to like fat and salt and sugar and to avoid bitter, because in historic times that was a guide to healthy foods, because they would be sweet, they would be slightly fatty to provide calories, and you avoid bitter because they were
possibly poisonous.
They might be possibly, poisonous. So that being the case, we gravitate towards those. So guess what food industry has decided? Because their purpose is to provide food, but mainly to provide also profits for the company. So they therefore capitalize on human liking for fat, salt, and sugar and produce lots of products with that. And when you have so many products like that, that's what floods the system. And I think there's another biological mechanism, which is that, as far as we know, there's no biological mechanism that says ultimately that there's a limit on how much you can eat. Yes, you feel full, but it seems like all of us can override our fullness because of the advertising, or you've just eaten a nice meal, a nice balanced meal, and feels great, and then someone brings in the chocolate cake and the ice cream, and the next thing you know, you've added that to that. And it doesn't take much additional calories every day to do that, to end up being obese and be at risk for chronic disease. And so I think the biological mechanisms go so far, but they were not developed in this particular food system.
Yeah. I totally agree. And we have lots of, to add on to that, we have lots of mechanisms to make us seek out food. So the feeling of hunger that all of us have had can overwhelm us and can keep us from concentrating, can keep it. So we have a lot of things to tell us, seek out food, seek out food. And we have very few things to tell us, stop eating, you've had enough. That's quiet. But the messages to seek out food in our biology are loud.
Yeah, I mean, not only in our biology, also everywhere you walk.
Exactly. And that's capitalizing on it. We get messages everywhere to eat, and to eat a lot, and to eat often.
And to eat lots of sugar.
Fat and salt. Yeah.
So the biology and the environment which capitalize on the biology means that now individuals really have to work hard at almost countering their biological motivations to eat fat and salt and sugar and eat bitter things. I mean, most of the vegetables are not sweet. I mean, and most people are able to eat fruit because it is sweet. But vegetables have a lot of vitamins and minerals that are not present in sugar, in fruit. And we're not biologically predisposed to eat them. So we have to work at it. And so that's why I think nutrition education tries to do that, as well as work on the food system to make it easier for people to make choices that are really healthy in the long run.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. But I'd like to take a step back and just define some terms first.
Yes.
So I notice you saying the word food system a lot, and I hear that phrase more and more as I'm getting more and more into this world. But can we just define first what is a food system, and then step into the definition of, say, a just and sustainable food system, because that's the phrase that I see on your website and everything for the Tisch Food Center. So who wants to take that?
Sure. So to maybe start with, before food system, to just start with system. So the basic definition of a system is interacting parts, so parts that work together. And so the food system is everything that has to happen to grow, transport, process, package, maybe store, sell in some environment, prepare or cook before we eat it. And then also what happens afterwards. What do we do with all the packaging that comes from our food? And what do we do with the food that we don't eat, whether it's vegetable scraps from cooking or food that we just don't eat for whatever reason, and the disposal for that. So it's all of those interacting parts that actually all end up working together. And as we said before, if we think about it then, as Isabel said, that it's really a system problem, that actually goes all the way back to what foods we're producing, because it's what foods farmers are growing today that will actually then end up influencing what ends up being on the shelves in the supermarkets, and then the government policies and the farm policies and the food safety policies and regulations are all what go into then what is actually the food that people end up being able to make the choice of. Because by and large, very few of us are growing any of our food. Some people may be growing some of their food. Some people may be growing more of their food. But most of us are depending on a system in place with all of those parts to actually provide basically the nourishment that we need every single day of our lives to stay alive.
Sustainable?
Then a just and sustainable food system. So we'll start with sustainable. So sustainable food, some sustainability are obviously words now that are really, really overused.
Yeah, it's kind of a buzzword.
It's kind of a buzzword, and it can mean a lot of things. But it really is that we are growing food in a way that we will be able to keep growing food in the future. And there is a lot of controversy about what that is and how we do it. There's some people that say we have a growing population, we need more food, therefore we could use any technologies that are out there to just produce enough food. There's others that say we actually need to be thinking about the soil and the health of the soil and making sure we're not losing soil. We need to be thinking about the other impacts that things such as putting fertilizer on food or pesticides on food or feeding animals antibiotics on a regular basis. What are the consequences of those on the planet, on ourselves? And then think about how it is we want to produce food to make sure that we are producing enough food and make sure that we have a system that is basically making sure that everybody has access to healthy food. So it gets complicated, but it's basically a sustainable system is one that will be able to keep producing food. And we would add into that healthy food that would actually sustain people. So sustain the planet, sustain people in the future. And then if you add just, that's kind of from a social justice standpoint, that is not just thinking about the end user's health and the sustainability of the earth, but also there's a lot of people that work on all parts of those food system. And basically in our country today, a lot of those jobs are some of the least desirable, lowest paying, and most dangerous jobs, from people who are picking food on farms to people that are working in food processing center plants or factories to people that are working at fast food restaurants. That we need to be thinking about all of the people that are basically involved in working to get us our food and making sure that they are safe, they actually are earning enough money that they can eat well for themselves. And so that's where the just part of it comes in. And also that every neighborhood has equal access, not just access to healthy food, but also feels comfortable in their environment, choosing going to those places. So, there's been examples of, as a matter of fact, for the class I'm teaching today, one of the articles the students read was about a neighborhood that was what's termed often a food desert, which means that there isn't food or healthy food available, and a store got put in there. But then they interviewed, and it was in a neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, Alberta neighborhood around Portland, Oregon. Then they interviewed who was using it, and it was actually the more middle class, higher educated, more white people that were going to the supermarket. When they interviewed the people who had lived in this neighborhood through the time it was a food desert, who had lower levels of education, were more people of color, they said, that supermarket, I don't feel comfortable in there. It doesn't I don't understand it. It's for the group that's not for me. And so they were actually shopping in it very infrequently, whereas the other people were. So it's also making everybody feel comfortable in a health promoting, more ecologically sustainable environment. And that's where I think nutrition education could come in. Was that clear?
Yeah, definitely. So with nutrition education, specifically the focus of your research and curriculum building, who's the target audience?
So far, for our work, mostly been youth, children, upper elementary, and middle school, I would say. Yeah.
And that has definitely been our work. And we've done also a lot of thinking about when you do teach about food, and I'm going to talk about children, when you do teach children about food, what is appropriate? And that changes with different age children. So, you could be doing nutrition education with children as young as 3 years old who are in a daycare center. And how that's going to look is basically going to be giving them experiences, maybe some really simple food preparation experience, making them comfortable trying new foods, particularly those more bitter vegetables, as Isabel was talking about, that they may not naturally like, making it comfortable for them to try those, making them see those as a normal part of what the food is that's in their environment. And so it's really, the term that I've sometimes used is good experiences with good food, and doing that over and over and over to make it comfortable. And then as they get older, when they're upper elementary and middle school, then it's time that you can actually put on more of the cognitive things to get them to think about, oh, when you're eating certain foods, you're going to be able to, and that's the motivation that Isabel talked about, do the things you want to be able to do better. So whether it's that they want to play a musical instrument or write poetry or play a sport, that if they're taking care of their bodies, they are going to be better at everything they want to be able to do. And then as they get even older, you can then actually layer on more of these conversations about justice, about food policy, about inequity in the system, because they can understand that. And particularly when you get to high school and college age, then they actually really want to understand the system. They want to rebel, and you can actually have them do positive rebellion to understand that. And truthfully, some of the more recent articles I've read is that, what is it called now? Generation Z, which are now 5 to 20 years old, are actually pushing back on the big food companies. And so they're thinking that as they get older, it's actually going, and I think food companies are scared. You know, they are scared and realizing that people are starting to reject their products. And I'm hopeful that actually this next generation coming up will do that. And this is not research, but my son, who's 15, he said, yeah, you know, sometimes some of my teachers will actually drink soda in class. And he said, I see my friends saying we don't want to drink that much of that because we know it's not so good for our bodies. And he's like, I think my generation is actually kind of doing a little bit better. And I don't know if that's true or just true for him, but it's encouraging. And I think that we can see change. And I think that big force can actually push the big food companies to realize that they need to do not just little changes of maybe taking out this ingredient or that ingredient, but really radical changes that will really change the kinds of foods they're producing and going all the way back to the farm in terms of how the foods that they're, you know, the ingredients that they're using, how they're being grown.
And I think that for this age group, to build on that, my guess is that thinking about the food system is probably as important a motivator for eating healthfully and eating well as health, because at that age, you know, you think you're going to live forever, and most of the times, whatever you eat for a given day doesn't have any immediate effect. And so whether you eat your vegetables or not, but if you know that somehow this is not good for the environment, that is not good for workers, there may be more of a motivation. So I think partly because we believe in these food sustainability and social justice issues, so that our curricula that are developed has that angle to them, and also partly to capture their motivation. As Pam was saying, our middle school curriculum was called Choice, Control, and Change, and its emphasis is you have choice, you can take control of your life, and you can make changes, and we're going to help you with that. And I think that's appealing to middle school youth.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we said a lot, so I like that you're asking questions to have us go back and define. So
yeah.
Any more of those?
Sure. So I noticed you talking about some of the social aspects as well. But what is the basis of the nutrition aspect for the curriculum?
So, and Isabel, you can jump in here. One of the curriculum that we've worked on pretty recently actually was to complement a book by somebody named Michael Pollan, and the book was called In Defense of Food. And if you look on the cover of that book, there's actually Michael Pollan's answer to what can you do to eat healthy is 7 words, and it's eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And even though both of us know between us a lot, and we keep up on it, a lot of the nutrition science that has, you know, and nutrition science is a pretty new field that's only about a little over a century old in terms of studying the nutrients in food. You can look at it in terms of nutrients, but actually what it comes down to, and what is basically what most people need to eat healthfully as well as sustainably, also to support social justice, is really to eat more foods that are closer to how they came from plants and animals. So we have a lot of activities in our curriculum that just is, what does it mean to be right from a plant or animal to be highly processed, and how does that change the food? Because in our current food system, that's even though it's so obvious, it's so easily forgotten. And so that's the big message, is eat foods closer to the state of how they came from plants and animals. The more you can recognize that, the better off it is. Then the second is not too much. And that's overall not too much, but particularly looking at that, as you said before, there's advertisements everywhere and there's big portions everywhere. And so to realize that matters. So, if you're doing something like, say you really wanted a Reese's peanut butter cup, they come in packets of 1, 2, or 3 peanut butter cups. It's better to get the 1 and enjoy every single bite of it than to get the 3, even though the 3-pack may be only a few cents more. But that's just giving more profit to the food company, and you're going to be better off for your health having smaller amounts. And then the third part, so it's eat food, which is the whole food, not too much, which is really think about the portion sizes, particularly when you're eating the processed foods. And then the last part is mostly plants. And basically, in general, all epidemiological research has shown that if people eat a higher plant-based diet, it doesn't mean that it has to be fully plant-based or vegan, but, some meat, some dairy products, some eggs, but then the bulk of what people are eating to come from all the foods that come from plants. So not only vegetables, fruits, but whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. People whose diets have more of those tend to be healthier than people whose diets don't. So it ends up basically taking the nutrition science and then boiling it down to a simpler food message for people. So I would say that that's pretty much the foundation of what we think is good for people to eat. You could go maybe into more specifics.
Well, yes, that's the basis. In some curricula, like the choice, control, and change, to operationalize that, to make it very specific, and we'll just tell you what the specific behaviors are that based on these principles that that Pam just talked about, which is that therefore we encourage, we have a sort of an eat more list and an eat less, or a do more list and a do less list. So that do more would be eat more fruits and vegetables, do more physical activity, drink more water. That do less would be eat fewer highly processed packaged snacks as a way to operationalize some of the eating closer to the way the food comes from nature. Fewer sweetened drinks, and less sedentary activities. Oh, and less fast food. So less fast food and less sedentary activity. And yes, there's probably some arbitrary definitions of what exactly is a fast food, what exactly is highly processed. People try to define them. But I think most kids seem to understand what a fast food is and what the processed food is. Certainly, fast food is not the same as eating broccoli, for example, or cabbage or something like that. So I think that, so that's how we operationalize the behaviors themselves. And then what we then do is, once you identify the behaviors, then we move into the social psychology world and say, so how do we help to motivate people? And we have found that motivations are often based on anticipated outcome from the behavior. I'll do a behavior if it leads to something I really want. If I eat this food, I'm going to, we make it immediate for youth, not avoiding disease 20 years down the road. It'll make me better at soccer. We have in our curricula, we have one kid, we follow him for a period of time. He wants to be good at soccer. The other young woman wants to be good at, one is on dance. Another one is on chess.
She wants to win the chess championship for her school.
So we sort of say, those are the motivations for youth. That if they eat healthfully, this is how they will get better at these. And so then the lessons become based on that and how to get to motivating them in terms of all the things that they're going to get out of it. In general, it's going to be better at chess, but more specifically as well. And then the next thing is then we try to give them some knowledge and skills on how to do that, and how to select foods, how to navigate the food, the environment, how to resist temptation by noticing what's being advertised on television, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and on top of that, also then to how to be advocates to change their environment. So with the middle schoolers, we talk about, you can go into the store across the street from your school and you can say, it would be great if you had some apples and bananas by the cash register. there's programs that are more from the government that are saying they should actually be making sure they have available, at least with the sweetened beverages, the smaller sizes, and maybe put those in the front opposed to the really large sizes in the front. And so that is actually then changing their environment and changing what's available to, again, go back to what we said before, to make the healthy choice the easier choice to get.
Mm-hmm. So I noticed a couple things in there. Two things I want to touch on. The first is the making the connection between eating well will make me better at X thing. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of that is because you talk about giving them the tools and motivating them to actually make the changes in their own lives. So I want to talk about their parents and how they react to this kind of teaching. So who wants to take the first part of that question? How do you actually make that connection between eating? If I eat my broccoli, I'll be better at dancing or whatever,
Maybe I'll do that part and you'll do the parents. Well, I think there's substantial evidence for that in fact, if you do that, you have all the vitamins and minerals that make sure that your brain actually functions well. There's now increasing evidence, certainly originally from animal studies, but also now from human studies, that eating a diet that's really high in processed foods and fats and things affect your cognitive performance. So it's not, you don't perform as well cognitively. We had a doctoral student who just did a dissertation where she took children, middle school children who were eating highly processed food diets, and for 2 weeks put them on a very healthy diet. And that was quite a feat to make sure that she provided breakfast, lunch, and dinner they took home, and the food for the weekend, and they were asked to eat that. And she had a rather small sample size, so her effects were not strong, but it did show in a direction that they in fact performed better in their cognitive tests at the end of 2 weeks. So you can imagine what's happening when people eat that kind of diet all the time, and if they did switch to a healthier diet. So I think it's not an excessive claim to say that if they eat their healthy foods that they're likely do better cognitively, and definitely they will do better physically in terms of performance in sports, because you do need all those fruits, those vegetables. There are some surveys that show that some kids don't eat a single vegetable in an entire day, and beyond French fries, which I don't think really qualify as vegetables.
Yeah, like how the government thinks that pizza qualifies as a vegetable.
Right, the sauce is the vegetable.
So I'm surprised that the students do as well as they do. I mean, I think that they could all do a lot better.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly right, and the science behind it, and then how we do it with the students, which is what we alluded to before, is basically all through some of our curriculum. They read case studies that are actually kids who they're watching go through the process, which actually gets a little bit to your second. Your second question was the parents. I thought you were going to ask something else, which maybe we can get to. Anyway, that basically show kids that were not making such healthy choices in terms of all the behaviors that Isabel said. We're drinking a lot of sweetened beverages, not eating fruits and vegetables. We're having large portions of chips and candy for snacks and stuff like that, and then actually do things better, and then actually end up feeling better and feeling like they can think better and perform better. And so we're basically making up a story about that, but it's then how they can internalize that. And we basically feel comfortable doing that because of all of the science that Isabel said that basically backs it up. In terms of the parents, that is hard, and actually across all of nutrition education, there has been a desire to make sure that in an appropriate way, and as we talked about before, in a motivating and feeling like it's uplifting parents, uplifting their role, understanding the challenges that parents have in their lives, really trying to get them the information. So one of the ways that obviously is often done is to have workshops for parents. The challenge with that is they can be really, really effective, but it's the parents who have the time to come and may already be interested. And so our next project that you have to come back and hear about it that we're hoping to do is actually something that we're really hoping to essentially be able to reach a lot of parents through something that would be more of an online kind of app kind of thing that really could reach all parents and actually put into practice everything that we have been talking about. We do have some anecdotal evidence, so it is anecdotal, but that there are sometimes children who really go home and actually do talk a lot about what they are learning in school with their families. So with one of our, when we were developing the Linking Food and the Environment Life curriculum, we did some really intense interviews with the children. And truthfully, it was mostly to see how they understood the food system as I described it earlier. But then at the end, we asked them, did they talk about it with their friends or their family? And by and large, they said they didn't talk about it with their friends because there was so much other social stuff going on that why would they talk about healthy eating with their friends?
Yeah.
And for their families, some of them said, well, my family already knows all of this, or no, I don't want them to, they're already telling me to eat healthy or whatever. And one girl sat back, and her answers to the food system part were fine, but not any better than anybody else's. And she sat back and she said, yes, I went home and my family, and it was amazing to hear. We went through all of our cabinets and I had them start to look at the foods, and we decided we were really going to start eating differently. And there was no reason she would have lied to me because it was just a little question at the end, and it was profound. And it made me realize that, sometimes we can have a really big impact on people that we don't realize. We only interviewed a small subset of the kids. And so I am not saying at all that happens to even half of the kids that we educate. But I would say in all of our program, there probably has been a small percentage of the kids who really have taken what they've learned and been motivated enough themselves that they've actually shared that with their families. And hopefully that's changed at least a few families to hopefully make some pretty big changes that may have a big impact in the long run.
So what kind of reactions have you gotten from parents?
Well, with one of our programs, one project that I was involved in one time that was actually combined, it's called Art and Healthy Living, and it's out of an organization called Studio in a School. And so the kids make all this art, and then the parents come in to see the art. And one of our students was one of the educators. And actually, and so this is anecdotal too, but actually it was a couple of people, but one parent in particular came up and said, so you're the one I have to thank. I used to be telling my daughter all the time, don't drink all those sweet drinks, and now she's telling me stop buying them because I don't want to drink them anymore. And so, again, that's anecdotal and it's one family, but it just shows that a lot of times I think it depends. Families are all different places in terms of where they are at with healthy eating. And sometimes it's the parents know what they want to do, and the children are so influenced by the advertising and the environment that sometimes just hearing it from somebody else and in school might be enough to get them to say, oh yeah, I actually do want to do this. So have the motivation to want to make the change. So, I think that a lot more could be done, and that's what we really want to do in the future is try to reach more parents, and from a place that's really understanding that it's hard for a lot of families to serve healthy food, especially families on a limited budget, especially families that live in neighborhoods where healthy food may be hard to find or inexpensive, or that fruits and vegetables that they do have aren't high quality, or that just hasn't been what they've been used to eating. So, it has to come from a place of really understanding people where they're at their lives, and when people feel understood and feel as though, I think, somebody who's an educator may feel like they're coming from a place of more power and privilege, but wants to listen to them, wants to hear them, wants to, see them be healthy. I think it just actually, hopefully, can be effective.
And I think one other aspect, if I can just add to that, is that when parents, I think all parents, but certainly if you don't have too much money, and you go and buy vegetables, and then your children won't eat it. And so you don't have money to throw away. So I think that to the extent that if education in the school and the kids come back and say, I'll eat it, parents will be thrilled, I think, for some of them, because I think that they want to eat healthfully, they want to serve their children healthful foods, but they realize that their kids reject it so much of the time and waste the food, and they can't afford to waste food. So we can help in that way to support parents in their preference of what they want to do with their children, but their inability to be able to do it given their circumstances.
So I was recently listening to a different podcast. It's more of like a political podcast, and the person that was being interviewed kind of talked about their opinions regarding what should be included in public education. And so I'm just curious, do you find many that people generally support the idea of nutrition education, especially with the influence of the sustainable and just piece, or do you find that people are more kind of like resistant, or what kind of is the reaction with that? Because I know that some people would think that, you know, like nutrition and like how to eat should be something that would be like taught at home versus at school, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying I agree one way or the other. It's just
sure.
an idea that was brought to my attention recently.
Yeah. And to not get into it is obviously there are a lot of wide-ranging political views in our country right now, and that's part of what a democracy is. By and large, and obviously we're located in New York City, and maybe the schools here are a little bit more socially progressive, I'm not sure, but a lot of the schools want these kinds of programs to come in and are actually, from both parents and sometimes teachers and administrators, are looking for programs that will actually integrate in things that will give students experiences, gardening and cooking and learning about food and learning about justice as well. One of our projects right now, we are looking at we did this a few years ago, but we're updating it now. We are looking at all of the programs that are actually working in New York City schools to do any kind of food education, and are doing a survey with them and we actually have found 60 organizations that have 90 programs that are in New York City schools. So we want to see, are they reaching all the schools? Are they reaching schools, all kinds of social demographic schools? And so that's what we're looking into now. But by and large, schools have a big challenge, and there is the issue of what you said, is there are some groups that think that certain kinds of education should happen at home. On the other hand, there's a lot of pressures on schools to basically teach the things that are now what are on the high-stake test, which is by and large primarily reading and math, and then less so, but also social studies and science. And so where does health education and all the health education issues, where nutrition education fits in, and it can be hard to fit that in and have enough time for everything else. And so people are really trying creative ways to combine it with the other subjects, put different things together. Do a lot of times some of the gardening and cooking activities might be done in before school programs or after school programs. So there's all kinds of ways that schools are actually integrating this in and taking a more holistic approach. Actually, educators have come together with the Center for Disease Control. The Center for Disease Control had the what was it called? The Comprehensive Health, had another name, but model for schools. And then there was what was called a whole child way of educating, which was not just thinking about the academic side, but educating the social, emotional aspect of the child. And so now they have come together to have this whole child, whole school, whole community model that is really trying to help put the whole child at the forefront. And so and actually right now all schools in our country that are on the National School Lunch Program, which is a lot, by and large, almost every public school and some not independent schools as well, with this year are actually have to update their wellness policy. Wellness policies were first mandated in 2004. Schools had to have them in 2006 when school started. And so they were, most schools haven't updated them since about 2010. At least that's when in New York City updated it. And one of the things that is required is that you actually get input from the whole community in terms of what the school wellness plan is. And that's where all of this kind of stuff is. So different schools can make different choices. Every school can have their own wellness plan based on their political beliefs. And that should be informed by the community. Long answer, but I think there's a lot of variation in terms of where people are at and, politics and all of that.
And I think that as evidence mounts, that some of these healthy behaviors does, in fact, improve cognitive performance in school. Parents are more likely to supported. It's certainly become very clear that physical activity is very important, and lots of schools had eliminated not just recess, but other physical activity, PE classes, and things like that. And they're realizing it's very important, and I think parents, by and large, think that nutrition education is probably a good thing in schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I know, like, from my own experience in school, like, my health class was totally useless. I did have home ec in middle school, and I think we learned how to bake cakes and stuff. And then gym class, I mean, was totally useless in teaching me, like, how to do things effectively. I mean, like, I didn't learn how to run properly. I didn't, like, learn, proper exercise techniques and things like that. It was like, a lot of times we'd, like, they'd say, okay, today's basketball day, or, like, today we're going to walk on the track, or, but it wasn't anything, like, useful,
Well, I think you've illustrated the point that we said right at the beginning, which is, or maybe before the interview even, that it's important that the nutrition education be done right, just as the PE has to be done right, which is that if you have such limited time with children, then you really need to do the why to, how to. Why should you be eating healthfully? How shall you do that? And it should be for the long haul. Just as in PE, it needs to be, and I think there's more switch to that now, that they should be teaching skills for healthy living, being physically active after you, outside of school, and even when you leave school, those skills that you learn are going to be useful for you, as opposed to, somewhat just marking time and filling up space. So, and I think home economics, the new home economics, I hope, is more along the lines of teaching children, youth, how to prepare foods in a way that is really healthy, as opposed to how to bake. Not that all cakes should be eliminated from one's diet or anything, but that's not the major skill that people need at this point.
Yeah, there's a lot of home ec rooms that actually were being used and then went into disuse for a while and are now being come back, and that exactly what Isabel said is now actually then being used for teaching students about healthy cooking and a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about this whole time. So I think it's how it's done, and doing it in a way that really is motivational, that the skills that are taught are practical, or the things that people really need, or things that people feel like are connected to their lives for both healthy eating and physical activity. So yeah, if the physical activity professor that Isabel and I know well, whose office is right upstairs, was in here and heard about your experience, he would have said, those gym teachers failed, because what you should have gotten from physical education is that you would want to be physically active in whatever way makes sense for you for your whole life. And if you didn't get that because you were too busy learning how to dribble the ball right and being told you weren't dribbling right, it missed the boat.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I figured all that out on my own after, like, going in the wrong direction for a while. And, I'm back into dance, and, like, I ran a couple 10Ks and stuff. But, like, it's like, I had to figure that out. I wasn't, like, taught, like, okay, this is how you breathe when you run. And, like, this is why you want to run, or, this is why you want to learn how to do a pull-up or whatever, like, it was not like the connection wasn't made for me back then. And nor was, like, how to eat right, it was, I was eating what was convenient, basically.
Right. Well, I was last year at the International Union of Home Economic Associations or something. Anyway, international group, and in Malta, and I ended up learning a lot about what other countries do with their home economics, and they're big on something that they call food literacy. So I think that that's what it could be about, which is to learn more about food literacy, in a way that not only source it, but how to prepare it, but also understanding all the issues, ramifications around food. And why do we think it has to be literacy about many other things? Financial literacy, people know how to do their taxes after they leave. Well, they should have food literacy so that they can live healthful, productive lives as well. So I think if we adopt some of those same principles, we would do better in our home economics classes.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think maybe to just sum it up is we really think that when done well and nutrition education is grounded in where people are at, is done in a way that actually gets them motivated to feel like from within themselves they want to do differently, not that somebody else is telling them to do it. And when they learn that they have the right experiences, the right knowledge and right skills, and know how to either navigate the environment or learn how to advocate for making the environment a more health-promoting, socially just, sustainable place, we really think that that's what can actually get people to make healthier decisions for themselves because they want to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I think a big thing that helped me in losing weight and everything was actually learning like the nitty gritty of the science, and like learning about calories and how to track them and the nutrients of food and things like that. So I'm wondering how much of that kind of like harder science and those kinds of details are included in your curriculum, and how that fits in.
Well, let me just say that obviously you have become interested in that for some reason. So that means you're already motivated. Mm-hmm. And so once you're motivated, then I think you want to seek that kind of information. And it becomes like a reinforcing. The more you know about it, the more motivated you are. In our curricula, we certainly, the middle school curriculum was all about energy balance. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about energy balance. Was that that's the Food, Health, and Choices was the balanceometer. But both curricula really talked about being balanced in terms of, she can tell you more about it, in terms of your calories in and calories out. And that's an example to go back to, which is that the middle school curriculum, the school science curriculum said that they had to learn about dynamic equilibrium. So we chose to use energy balance as to fit that, so that the teachers could say, okay, instead of talking about equilibrium maybe in the weather or geology or something, they could do it for food. And that worked very well. But I wouldn't say that we spend a lot of time on learning the number of calories in different kinds of foods and things, because I think people can look that up, and then we also told them certainly how to use food labels to do that, but that the idea of balance was what was important.
So to just add on a couple of more specifics to that, and hopefully the way I describe this is your listeners will be able to picture it, but one thing to end up teaching them about what is energy balance is we take a plastic cup and we put a hole in the bottom. So if you put water in a plastic cup that has a hole in the bottom, it will come out. Mm-hmm. And so to stay in balance, you want to be pouring water in at the same rate that the water is coming out. If you pour the water in too slow, the level of the water in the cup, because there's water coming out the bottom, will start to go down. But if you pour it in too fast, the cup is going to overflow because more water is going in than the rate that's going out. And so what we want to do is keep our body in balance. And so the way that we end up, we don't get into the very specifics of counting all calories and stuff like that. And I think what Isabel said was just perfect. Somebody who really wants to make change and is already motivated can seek that out. But we will do things such as for sweetened beverages, which is one of the behaviors that we're focused on. Basically, the recommendation in terms of teaspoons is to have no more than, for middle school students, no more than 12.5 teaspoons of added sugar a day. And then we would look at something like a 20-ounce bottle of soda or a fruit punch or something like that. And by and large, a 20-ounce bottle has about 16 or 17 teaspoons of sugar in that one bottle. And the kids will just pick that up after school and think nothing of it. And then we're like, look, that's already more added sugar than what is recommended as the maximum to have in the whole entire day. And what if you picked up a bottle on your way into school and a bottle after school, and then you're going to have a drink of, something like that at dinner that night? You're way over on what the maximum sugar is. Mm-hmm. And so it's in that way that we do it. So we try to make it really real and really connected, really specifically to what they're eating, and that they can compare it to the recommendation or a standard. Because if they didn't know, they would be like, well, what's the difference? Maybe I can have 50 teaspoons of sugar a day and I'll be fine. And so they need to know that's the maximum and then compare the foods to that. We do another activity about food that's basically counting out how many energy cards the food has, and an energy card in this activity is about 25 calories. So you look at something like an apple, which is about 75 calories, and that's 3 cards. And then you look at something like a large order of fries from a fast food restaurant, which is about 300 calories, and so that's 12 cards. And so it just kind of is a way then to say, what would you rather have? And then we actually talk about how long it takes to walk. It's about a quarter of a mile to walk off one of the energy cards. And so it ends up giving them a visual comparison. So the number of the calories, if you're a middle school kid not really thinking about that yet, the number of calories is just going to be a number that's going to go over you. But if you can put it into a perspective, then it can make it feel more real and make you say, oh yeah, I might want to have an apple instead of a big fries for my snack after school, because that's going to be the right amount of energy and keep me in energy balance, from those kinds of activities. And I might want to think about the size of the sweetened beverage I have, or to have water instead of a sweetened beverage, because I'm realizing now how much sugar is actually in those drinks.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the analogy maybe is that sometimes when people focus on the individual trees, they forget about the forest. So we try to give them some skills for the long term. So hopefully they will remember by the time they're gone that, okay, an apple only has a small number of cards, and the apple pie has 10 times as many.
But it's made from apples.
So that's the general principles.
Yeah.
The principles that we hope that they will get, that will last them a long time, rather than the individual numbers.
And how do you talk about portion control with them, like portion sizes, and say like, this portion is the right size versus this portion is like 3 times the amount of what you really should be eating. And if you eat this whole portion, like that's your whole amount of calorie budget for the day.
Right. So again, kind of similar to what I was saying with the sugar and stuff, but sometimes we've said, instead of supersize it, which is obviously something that's, supersize me kind of made that popular, maybe not so popular. But we say small size it. And so when you're going to a fast food place, get the smaller size. And we actually will do things such as compare the amount of fat, and now saturated fat, because the saturated fat is the recommendation, is in something like a regular size burger from a fast food restaurant versus a double cheeseburger. And basically the regular size burger actually has about 1/3 of the amount that you should have in the day. So if that's one of your meals, it fits in. The double cheeseburger actually has close to the amount that you're supposed to have in the day. And so if you eat any other food, and maybe even if that's your snack after school, you've kind of blown your whole amount that you can have of saturated fat and still be healthy. And so it's the same kind of thing as the sugar. And so it's really comparing those and making them see that the portion size really does make a difference in terms of what you're putting into your body.
So the principle becomes small size it or right sizes, which is a term that Pam uses frequently. So the right size for you, right size. And I think people just are not very aware of size of food and portions. And I will take the liberty of adding to that I think that America has a big value on things being cheap and large. So and so when you combine those when it comes to food, it causes problems, because so that's why they appeal to being cheap. In fact, they say, for a few cents more, you get almost double what you got. So of course, we all believe that the big value for money, that's what you want, and so you end up eating the large sizes. So I think we also, on that point, try to work from the supply side as well, try to persuade restaurants and other places not to keep urging people to take these large sizes.
And I think to maybe bring it full circle back to what Isabel said at the very beginning, which is how our biology works, is making people aware that we don't have a lot of signals to tell us we've eaten too much, and we have a lot of signals to tell us we're hungry, and to listen to when you're full. And that's where the right size it comes in, is to stop and listen. And sometimes even we don't get the signal that we're full until about 20 minutes after we've eaten. So if you've overeaten in 10 minutes, you're not going to know until later. And so just saying stop and think and listen to your body, because everything in the world is telling us not to listen to our internal signals, to listen to all the advertising and all the promotions and all the flashing signs everywhere that are saying buy this large size. And when we stop and think about ourselves and listen to our bodies, we may be able to bring back some of that self-regulation.
Yeah, I mean, even just my own experience too, like when I was learning about how to portion sizes and, you know, using my food scale and all of that, like, I mean, in the beginning it was like, oh, but I want to eat more, like, because it tastes good and whatever, but like, I just had to like trust that like this is the right amount because like I know how many calories are in this and I like know that I have a calorie budget and like I can't eat more. Like I just need to stop. But then eventually you get used to it.
Right.
You know, and then it's normal and then you don't need to go in for seconds. You don't feel like you want them because you're done. So I mean, just in my own experience. So
Good.
Definitely. I have a couple of questions that I usually ask at the end. So if you want to kind of, I'll ask the question and you can just give a brief answer each one in a row. So how do you define health or healthy and why is that important?
So I think that health, and maybe it relates to sustainable and healthy, are things that will actually keep us being able to perform at our best for a long time into the future. So preventative and basically keep us performing at our best. Why it's important is our ability to do what we want to do is ultimately the utmost important. And to probably use a very, very overused saying, but I think it's really true, is if you don't think about your health today, you're going to have to tomorrow because you won't be able to do the things you want to do.
Yes, health, I think, for most people is not an end in itself. And we sometimes make it think like that. None of us think about our health till we don't have it. So I think that health is a means to an end. Being healthy means, as Pam said, being able to do other things that we want to do. And as long as you're healthy and you're doing those things, you don't think about it much. So why is it important? It is important because being healthy is what makes it possible for us to do everything else in our lives. And when you don't have it, when you haven't thought about it, as you say, today and tomorrow, you don't have it, then you suddenly realize how important it was. And so, therefore, I think being conscious of its importance now and into the future is a very important concept.
And what do you see as the biggest issue or problem facing our society as it relates to food and health?
I should have started with that.
Well, I think it's what we've said all along, is that from our policies of what foods are grown on our farms and what our government supports in terms of what has grown, basically sets it up that then the food supply that we have isn't designed to be the food supply. If we were designing a food supply to make all of our citizens have enough the right amount of healthy food, it's not the food system that we have.
Yes, I think I would say that the primary concern for the future is, in fact, the nature of the food system, the nature in which, where we need to, that we all have to select our food from, because that's all that's out there. And I think I would add to that then is that, meantime, since we don't have that system yet, we do want to conduct nutrition education in a way that really motivates people, provides them the skills, and the skills not only to eat more healthfully, but also to advocate for health in various settings and to advocate for the environment and the food system that grows our food.
And what's the most exciting thing going on in food and health?
I think it's that people of all walks of life, all aspects of life, are really starting to think seriously that there needs to be change. And I think that there's a great article that in our course called Nutritional Ecology, we have an ending session that's called Hope, and the students read one article, so I'll give it a plug. It's called Why the Food Movement is Unstoppable by Jonathan Latham, and it's in independent science news. But if somebody just Googles Why the Food Movement is Unstoppable, they'll be able to find it. And I think it just shows that it's emerging everywhere. It's kind of it has thought leaders, but it's really a leaderless movement, and it's coming from the ground up, and I think that that's what's going to make it successful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That I think that lots of things are happening from the ground up, from sort of a people movement to eat better. I think that's the most exciting. I think it really is.
Okay, great. Thanks again to Isobel and Pam from the nutrition department at the Teachers College at Columbia University. Did I get that right? I wasn't reading it, so
Yes.
thanks for being a part of the podcast today. I enjoyed talking to you guys and learning about everything that you're doing here, and I think the listeners will enjoy hearing about it too, and maybe get some insights about how to talk to kids about food, and also if they're interested in food education, they can probably get in touch with you, right?
Sure.
Okay.
And you're welcome.
All right. Thanks to the listeners for tuning into this episode of the Put a Fork in It podcast, the podcast that offers fresh perspectives at the intersection of food, health, business, and creativity. We look forward to sharing future episodes and interviewing other interesting people. If you have any feedback or suggestions on what you'd like to hear on this show, or you'd be interested in becoming a sponsor, you can email me at kaylina@putaforkinitpodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the episode notes, links, and leave comments at putaforkinitpodcast.com, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. If you love this show and want to support it, you can do so by sharing it with a friend or donating to us on patreon.com/putaforkinit. And of course, make it a delicious day.